The red warning lights flashed across the bridge of the orbital station New Seoul. Captain Dae-ho stood with his hands behind his back, watching the massive alien ships appear through the viewing window. Each ship was the size of a small city, dark metal gleaming against the stars. There were 12 of them, positioned around Earth like hungry wolves circling their prey. "Sir, we're getting a transmission," said Lieutenant Park from the communications desk. Her voice was steady, but Dae-ho could hear the fear underneath. "Put it through," Dae-ho said calmly. The main screen filled with the image of something that looked like a cross between a shark and a tiger. The creature had rows of sharp teeth and yellow eyes that seemed to burn with rage. When it spoke, its voice was deep and threatening. "I am Commander Vexthar of the Veltharian Empire. Your species has been marked for conquest. You have one standard rotation to surrender completely, or we will hunt every human across this galaxy until none remain. We are the apex predators of 17 sectors. No prey has ever escaped us." The transmission ended abruptly. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's systems. Dae-ho could feel his crew waiting for orders. Some were probably expecting him to call for battle stations or begin evacuation procedures. Instead, he walked to his desk and picked up a small ceramic cup. "Open a channel back to their command ship," he said. Lieutenant Park looked confused, but followed orders. The screen showed Commander Vexithar again, this time looking surprised that the humans were responding so quickly. "Commander Vexithar," Dae-ho said politely, holding up his cup. "Thank you for your message. Before we discuss your terms, would you like to come down to Earth? I'd like to show you something that might interest you. We have tea, and I think you'll find our greatest achievement quite remarkable." The alien commander's eyes narrowed. His lips pulled back to show more of those sharp teeth. "You mock us with your weakness, human. Do you think offering beverages will save your pathetic species?" "Not at all," Dae-ho replied calmly. "I simply think you might want to see what you're planning to destroy before you make your final decision. After all, you said you're apex predators. Don't predators usually study their prey first?" Commander Vexithar leaned forward on his screen. Behind him, other alien faces appeared, all with the same sharp features and hungry expressions. They whispered among themselves in their own language, which sounded like growling mixed with clicking sounds. "You intrigue us, human. Very well. We will send a war party to your surface. But know this. We have studied thousands of species across the galaxy. They all follow the same pattern when faced with superior force. They either fight desperately like cornered animals, or they run screaming into the void. You are doing neither, which means you are either very foolish or very dangerous." "Perhaps we're something else entirely," Dae-ho said with a small smile. The transmission ended again. Dae-ho turned to face his crew, who were all staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. "Sir," said Commander Lee from the tactical station, "with respect, what are you doing? Those ships could destroy every major city on Earth within hours." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Dae-ho replied. He walked back to the viewing window and looked down at the blue and green planet below. "Contact Dr. Ji-won at the surface facility. Tell her we're going to have some very important guests." On the surface of Earth, Dr. Ji-won received the message while standing in what used to be the most heavily militarized zone on the planet. The area between North and South Korea had once been filled with weapons, soldiers, and walls. Now it was covered with the most beautiful gardens anyone had ever seen. Ji-won was a small woman with graying hair and gentle eyes, but she had one of the sharpest minds in xenobiology. She had been studying the alien transmissions since their ships first appeared, and she was beginning to understand something important about these Veltharians. "They think like hunters," she said to her assistant, Young-ho, as they walked through rows of flowering plants. "Every message they've sent talks about prey and predators, hunting and conquest. They literally cannot imagine any other way of thinking." Young-ho, a young man fresh from university, looked nervous. "But Dr. Ji-won, if they're such successful hunters, how do we defend against them?" Ji-won stopped walking and knelt beside a small plant with bright blue flowers. She touched one of the petals gently. "We don't defend, Young-ho. We show them something they've never seen before." The gardens around them stretched for kilometers in every direction. There were plants from every nation on Earth growing side by side. Flowers that used to exist only in specific climates now thrived together through careful genetic adaptation. Trees that had been extinct for centuries grew tall and strong again, brought back through patient scientific work. In the distance, Ji-won could see the old guard towers that had once watched for enemies. Now they housed equipment for monitoring soil conditions and weather patterns. The bunkers where soldiers once prepared for war had been converted into seed storage facilities and research laboratories. "The aliens will be here soon," Ji-won said, standing up and brushing dirt from her knees. "Make sure Hyun-soo is ready to meet them." Hyun-soo was 93 years old and had been working in these gardens since the day the wars ended. He moved slowly now, but his hands were still steady as he tended to his plants. He was currently working on a special lily that had taken him 30 years to perfect. The flower was white with gold edges, and it would bloom only once every 7 years. "Doctor," Hyun-soo said when Ji-won approached, "the young man tells me we're having visitors from the stars." "Yes, Hyun-soo. Very dangerous visitors who think they understand humans." The old man smiled and continued his work. "Then perhaps it's time they learned something new." Above them, the alien ships waited in the darkness of space, their crews preparing for what they thought would be another simple conquest. They had no idea they were about to encounter something that would challenge everything they believed about strength, power, and survival. The day that would change both species forever was about to begin. The Veltharian transport ship landed with a thunderous crash in the middle of what used to be the most dangerous border on Earth. Warpack leader Morgan stepped out first, his massive form casting a long shadow across the landing site. He was even larger than Commander Vexthar, with scars covering his arms and face from countless battles. Behind him came 12 other Veltharian warriors, each one carrying weapons that could level a building. They moved like a hunting pack, their yellow eyes scanning for threats, their clawed hands ready for violence. They expected to see military installations, defensive positions, maybe even weapons pointed at them. Instead, they saw flowers. Morgan stopped walking and stared in confusion. Everywhere he looked, there were plants, not just scattered weeds or wild growth, but carefully arranged gardens that stretched to the horizon. Paths wound between flower beds and vegetable plots. Small streams carried water to different sections. The air smelled sweet and clean. "Where are your weapons?" Morgan demanded in broken human language. "Right here," said a voice behind him. The warpack spun around, ready to fight, but they saw only an old human man kneeling beside a small plant. He was using tiny tools to adjust something about the soil around it. His hair was white, his back was bent with age, and his hands shook slightly. He looked like he couldn't hurt a fly. This was Hyun-soo, and he was holding a small gardening spade. This is weapon? Morgan growled, pointing at the spade. In a way, Hyun-soo said calmly, not looking up from his work. This tool has helped me fight disease, hunger, and despair for 70 years. It's quite effective. Dr. Ji-won appeared from behind a large tree, walking calmly toward the confused aliens. With her was Min-ah, the director of the preserve, and Captain Dae-ho, who had just arrived from the orbital station. "Welcome to Earth," Min-ah said politely. "I'm Min-ah, and I'll be your guide today. Would you like to see what we've built here?" Morgan looked around at his warriors, who were just as confused as he was. In all their conquests across the galaxy, they had never encountered anything like this. Every other species had either attacked them immediately or tried to hide behind fortifications. These humans were acting like they were tourists. "This is trick," Morgan said suspiciously. "You hide weapons. You try to confuse us before attack." "No tricks," Captain Dae-ho said. "Everything you see here is exactly what it appears to be. We're gardeners." Min-ah began walking down one of the paths, and the aliens followed reluctantly. She pointed to different sections as they walked. "These roses came from what used to be called England. The rice grows in paddies designed after ancient Japanese techniques. Those fruit trees were originally from Brazil, but we've adapted them to grow in this climate." "Why?" Morgan asked. The question seemed to hurt his throat, as if asking about anything other than warfare was painful. "Because they're beautiful," Min-ah replied simply. "And because they feed people." They walked past a section where dozens of humans were working, together, planting new seedlings. The people ranged from children to elderly, all working side by side. Some wore clothes that showed they came from different countries, but they were all focused on the same task. "These are your warriors?" asked one of the younger Veltharians. "Some of them used to be," Dae-ho answered. "Others were engineers, teachers, artists. Now they're all gardeners." Dr. Ji-won stopped beside a large greenhouse made of glass and metal. Through the transparent walls, the aliens could see thousands of plants growing in controlled conditions. "This is our seed vault," she explained. "We preserve genetic material from plants that went extinct during our wars." "Extinct means dead forever," Morgan said, as if explaining something obvious. "It used to," Ji-won said with a smile. "But we brought them back." She led the group inside the greenhouse. The air was warm and humid, filled with the sounds of water trickling and fans humming. There were plants the aliens had never seen before, with strange shapes and impossible colors. "This orchid disappeared from Earth 300 years ago," Ji-won said, pointing to a delicate purple flower. "We rebuilt it from DNA fragments we found in old museums. It took us 15 years, but now it grows again." 15 years? Morgan repeated. "Why wait so long? Why not just find new plants?" "Because this one was special," Hyun-soo said, appearing beside them with his gardening tools. "It only grew in one place on Earth and nowhere else in the universe. When we lost it, something unique was gone forever. We couldn't let that happen." The aliens looked around the greenhouse with growing confusion. Their entire culture was based on taking what they wanted immediately. The idea of waiting 15 years to bring back a single flower was completely alien to them. "Show them the memorial garden," Min-ah said quietly to Ji-won. They walked to another section where the plants grew in patterns that formed symbols and words. As they got closer, Morgan could see that the words were names. Thousands and thousands of names. "During our wars, we lost many people," Captain Dae-ho explained. Instead of building monuments of stone, we planted living memorials. Each person who died is remembered by a plant that feeds the living. You honor dead by growing food? Morgan asked. We honor them by making sure death leads to life, Hyun-soo said. Every plant here represents someone who died so that others could learn to live differently. One of the younger Veltharian warriors spoke up. But where is your pride? Where is your strength? You speak only of growing and waiting and feeding? These are not the words of apex predators? Minna looked at the young alien with sad eyes. We used to think like you do. We used to believe that strength meant taking what we wanted and destroying what opposed us. But that kind of strength nearly destroyed us completely. She gestured toward a section where twisted metal sculptures stood among the flowers. The metal was clearly from old weapons, tanks, missiles, aircraft. But now they served as supports for climbing vines and bird nests. These are the remains of our last war, she said. We beat our swords into plowshares, as our old book said. We learned that true strength isn't about how much you can destroy. It's about what you can create that will outlast you. Morgan stared at the metal sculptures, his warrior mind trying to process what he was seeing. These humans had taken instruments of death and turned them into supports for life. It was like nothing in his experience. This is weakness, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Hyun-soo asked. He led them to his special lily, the one he had been working on for 30 years. The plant was small and unremarkable, but the old man looked at it with deep love. This flower will bloom tomorrow for the first time. I have worked on it longer than most Veltharians live. When I am gone, it will still be here, still blooming every 7 years. My great-grandchildren will see it flower when I am just a memory. What good is flower? Morgan demanded. What good is anything you have conquered? Hyun-soo replied gently. Will it be there for your great-grandchildren? For the first time since landing, Morgan had no answer. In all their conquests, the Veltharians had never built anything meant to last. They took what they wanted and moved on, leaving empty worlds behind them. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the gardens, the aliens found themselves in a place that challenged everything they believed about power, strength, and survival. They had come expecting to face warriors, but instead they had found gardeners who spoke of time in decades and centuries rather than moments and seasons. The day was far from over, and the lessons were just beginning. Bo-Ram arrived at the gardens just as the alien visitors were growing more agitated. She was a small woman with calloused hands and bright eyes, wearing the simple clothes of someone who worked with soil and plants every day. But she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had once commanded armies. Warpack leader Morgan, Captain Daeho, said, I'd like you to meet Bo-Ram. She used to be a military strategist, but now she designs agricultural systems. Morgan looked at Bo-Ram with interest for the first time. Here, finally, was someone who might understand warfare. You were warrior? I was, Bo-Ram said simply. I planned battles that killed thousands of people. I was very good at it. Then you understand strength, Morgan said, nodding approvingly. Why do you waste time with plants now? Bo-Ram walked over to a large holographic display that materialized from the ground. With a wave of her hand, images appeared in the air above them. Cities in flames, armies clashing, massive explosions that could be seen from space. These are records from the food wars of 2157, she said, the last great conflict our species fought. We were running out of resources, and every nation wanted what the others had. I helped plan the strategy that would have given us victory. The aliens watched the holographic battles with approval. This was something they understood. Armies moving across landscapes, weapons destroying everything in their path, the strong taking from the weak. Good warfare, Morgan said approvingly. You won? We all lost, Boram said quietly. The holograms changed to show the aftermath. Dead cities, poisoned farmland, millions of refugees fleeing across contaminated wastelands. We fought so hard for the remaining food that we destroyed most of what was left. Half the planet became uninhabitable. But the strong survived, one of the younger Veltharians said. That is natural law. Did they? Boram asked. She changed the hologram again, showing a single figure walking through the ruins, a thin, starving person in rags. This was me, 3 months after our victory. I was eating grass and tree bark because there was nothing else left. The aliens looked confused. In their experience, war ended with clear winners and losers. The winners took everything and moved. On to the next conquest. What happened then? Morgan asked. We learned, Boram said simply. The hologram changed to show the same devastated landscape, but now there were people working together, planting seeds in the poisoned soil. We realized that destroying your enemy's resources is useless if you need those resources to survive. Sangmin appeared from behind a cluster of fruit trees, carrying a basket of the strangest produce the aliens had ever seen. There were apples that glowed soft blue, carrots that grew in spirals, and berries that changed color as you watched them. This is Sangmin, Boram said. He's a genetic artist. He designs food. Designs food? Morgan repeated. Sangmin set down his basket and picked up one of the glowing apples. We learned how to modify genetic codes during the war. Originally, we used this technology to create biological weapons, viruses that would destroy enemy crops, bacteria that would poison their water supplies. He took a bite of the blue apple, and the glow spread from where his teeth had touched it. Now we use the same knowledge to create food that can grow anywhere, in any conditions. This apple can grow in toxic soil and actually helps clean the contamination as it develops. You turned weapons into food? Asked one of the younger Veltharians. We turned everything into food, Sangmin said with a smile. Or medicine, or building materials, or art. Look. He led them to a section where vegetables grew in patterns that were clearly decorative rather than practical. There were tomatoes that grew in perfect geometric shapes, corn that formed spiraling towers, and squash that created living sculptures. Why make food beautiful? Morgan asked. Food is for eating. Because beauty makes people happy, Sangmin said. And happy people are more likely to work together instead of fighting. The Warpack leader shook his head in frustration. You speak of happiness and beauty and working together. These are not the concerns of apex predators. No, Boram agreed. They're the concerns of apex survivors. Before Morgan could respond, a new voice boomed across the garden. The aliens spun around to see a massive spacecraft descending from the sky. It was even larger than the transport that had brought them down, and it carried the command insignia of the Veltharian fleet. Commander Vexthar emerged from the ship with a dozen of his personal guard. He was clearly angry, his yellow eyes blazing with fury as he strode toward the group. Warpack leader Morgan, Vexthar snarled. What is the meaning of this delay? Why have you not secured this territory for conquest? Commander, Morgan said carefully. These humans, they are different from our previous encounters. Different how? Vexthar demanded. Are they stronger? Do they have superior weapons? Are their defenses impenetrable? They have no defenses, Morgan admitted. Then, why do they still live? Vexthar roared. Captain Deho stepped forward calmly. Commander Vexthar, welcome to Earth. Your Warpack leader was just learning about our history. Perhaps you'd like to hear it as well? I have no interest in the bleeding of prey animals, Vexthar said. I challenge you to single combat, human. Face me as a warrior and die with whatever honor your pathetic species possesses. I appreciate the offer, Deho said politely. But I have a better idea. Would you like to learn how to grow orchids? The alien commander stared at him in disbelief. You mock me with talk of flowers when I offer you honorable death? Not at all, Deho said. I'm offering you something much more valuable than victory in combat. I'm offering you knowledge that could transform your entire civilization. Vexthar's personal guard moved closer, their weapons ready. The tension in the garden grew thick as the two groups faced each other, predators prepared for violence and gardeners offering seeds. It was at that moment that Tae Young appeared. She was barely, out of her teens, a small intern who helped maintain the memorial gardens. In her hands, she carried a single potted plant with a closed bud that was just beginning to open. She walked directly toward Warpack leader Morgan, ignoring the weapons and the tension and the fact that any one of these aliens could kill her, without effort. When she reached him, she held out the pot. This is for you, she said simply. Morgan stared down at the small human offering him a tiny plant. What is it? A peace lily, Tae Young said. It only blooms once every 7 years. Today is that day. As if responding to her words, the bud began to open slowly, revealing white petals with edges that seemed to shimmer with their own light. It was the most beautiful thing any of the aliens had ever seen. Why do you give this to me? Morgan asked, his voice much quieter than before. Because beauty shared is beauty doubled, Tae Young said, and because everyone deserves to see something beautiful. Commander Vexthar watched this exchange with growing rage. His entire worldview was built on strength, dominance, and the right of the powerful to take whatever they wanted. But here was the weakest human he had seen, offering the most precious gift to his Warpack leader and expecting nothing in return. Enough, he roared. This ends now. He activated his personal communicator and spoke rapidly in the Veltharian language. Within moments, the sky began to glow with the charging weapons of the fleet above. You have played your games, humans, Vexthar said. Now you die as all prey must die. But as the first energy beams began to lance down from space, something unprecedented happened. The humans didn't run. They didn't hide. Instead, they began to gather around their gardens, forming protective circles around the plants they had spent decades nurturing. And for the first time in his life, Warpack leader Morgan found himself wondering if the humans might be right about strength after all. The energy beams from the Veltharian fleet lit up the sky like deadly lightning, but they stopped just short of hitting the ground. Commander Vexthar had ordered a warning bombardment, expecting the humans to scatter in terror like every other species he had conquered. Instead, something happened that made his blood run cold. The humans formed circles around their gardens. Young-Ho linked arms with an elderly woman named Su-Jin. Children stood next to their grandparents. Scientists joined hands with farmers. Thousands of people created living shields around the plants they had spent their lives nurturing. They weren't running. They weren't fighting. They were protecting. "What are they doing?" Vexithar demanded, staring at the scene below. Warpack leader Morgan stood frozen, still holding the flowering plant that Taeyong had given him. The young human was now part of one of the protective circles, her small hand clasped in the weathered grip of old Hyun-Soo. "They're showing us what they're willing to die for," Morgan said quietly. Dr. Ji-won stepped away from one of the circles and walked directly toward Vexthar, even as the alien fleet's weapons charged for another strike. She showed no fear, only a deep sadness that seemed to affect the alien commander in a way he didn't understand. "Commander," she said, "may I ask you a question?" "You dare speak to me as your world burns?" Vexithar snarled. "What do you have that will still exist in 1,000 years?" Ji-won asked simply. The question hit Vexithar like a physical blow. He had conquered 847 worlds across 17 sectors. He commanded fleets that could shatter planets and armies that had never known defeat. But as he tried to answer Ji-won's question, he realized something terrible. In all those conquests, he had never built anything meant to last. "I have my empire," he said uncertainly. "Where are the first worlds you conquered?" Ji-won asked. "What remains of the civilizations that came before you?" Vexithar's mouth opened, but no words came. The truth was that most of those early conquest sites were now empty husks, stripped of resources and abandoned. The Veltharians took what they wanted and moved on, leaving dead worlds behind them. "Our ships," he said, grasping for an answer. "Our weapons. Our military might. And when you die, who will remember your name?" Ji-won pressed gently. "What will you leave behind that makes the universe better than it was before you existed?" Before Vexthar could answer, an old woman stepped out from one of the protective circles. This was Yunmi, who had survived the food wars and spent the last 70 years growing trees. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "Warpack leader Morgan," she said, walking directly to the confused alien. "Would you like to see my life's work?" Morgan looked at Commander Vexthar, who was still struggling with Ji-won's questions. Against his better judgment, he nodded. Yunmi led him to a single tree that stood alone in a cleared space. It wasn't particularly large or impressive, but it was heavy with strange fruit that glowed softly in the growing twilight. "I planted this the day our wars ended," Yunmi said, placing a gnarled hand on the tree's bark. "It took me 30 years to develop the genetic modifications. The fruit from this tree can feed a family for a week, and the seeds can grow in poisoned soil." "One tree?" Morgan asked. "One tree," Yunmi confirmed. "But look." She pointed to the horizon, where other glowing dots could be seen scattered across the landscape. "Seeds from this tree now grow on 40 worlds where humans have settled. Each tree produces 1,000 fruits per year. Each fruit contains 100 seeds." Morgan did the mathematics in his head. A single tree, planted by one old woman, was now feeding millions of people across dozens of worlds. "This tree will live for 500 years, Yunmi continued. "Long after I'm gone, long after you're gone, it will still be feeding people who haven't been born yet." "But what glory is there in this?" Morgan asked, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Where is the conquest? The victory? Every person who eats from these trees and lives another day is my victory," Yunmi said simply. Every child born because their parents didn't starve is my conquest. I have defeated hunger on 40 worlds. What enemy have you defeated that stayed defeated? Morgan thought about all the civilizations he had conquered. Most had either been destroyed completely or had eventually rebuilt and rebelled. The Veltharians spent enormous resources fighting the same battles over and over again because they never addressed the root causes of conflict. Dr. Jiwan turned back to Commander Vexthar, who was watching the interaction between his warpack leader and the old human woman. "Your people are dying, aren't they?" she said softly. Vexithar's head snapped around to stare at her. "How could you know that?" "Because conquerors always die," Jiwan said. "You strip mine worlds for resources and then abandon them. You take everything immediately instead of building sustainable systems. How many of your homeworlds are still habitable?" The alien commander's silence was answer enough. "Let me guess," Jiwan continued. "You've conquered so many worlds that you've forgotten which one you originally came from. You live on ships now because planets are just resources to be consumed." "We are strong," Vexithar said, but there was something desperate in his voice. "We survive by taking what we need." "You survive by destroying your future," Jiwan replied. "How long can that last?" Hyun-Soo approached them slowly, his ancient hands still steady as he carried his gardening tools. The 93-year-old man looked up at the massive alien commander without fear. "Young man," he said to Vexthar, "may I show you something?" "I am not young," Vexthar protested. "I have lived for 3 centuries. "I have plants older than you," Hyun-Soo said with a gentle smile. "Come." He led both aliens to his special lily, the one he had been perfecting for 30 years. The plant was just beginning to open its golden-edged petals for the first time. "This flower took me longer to create than your entire species has been traveling in space," Hyun-Soo said. "But when it blooms, it produces a medicine that can cure diseases you haven't even discovered yet." 30 years for one flower," Morgan said. "We could conquer 30 worlds in that time." "And in 30 more years, those worlds would be empty," Hyun-Soo replied. "But this flower will still be blooming, still healing, still making the universe a little bit better." He knelt beside the plant and used a small tool to adjust the soil around its roots. "Strength isn't about how fast you can destroy, Commander. True strength is about what you can create that will outlast you." Commander Vexthar stared at the flower, at the old man tending it with such care, at the humans still standing in protective circles around their gardens, despite the weapons pointed at them from space. "You're saying we're wrong," he said finally. "Everything we believe, everything we've built our civilization on, you're saying it's wrong." "Not wrong," Hyun-Soo said kindly. "Just incomplete. You've learned half the lesson of survival. How to take what you need. But you never learned the other half. How to make sure there's something left for tomorrow." The old man stood up slowly and looked directly into Vexthar's yellow eyes. "The question isn't whether you're strong enough to destroy us, Commander. The question is whether you're strong enough to let something grow." Above them, the Veltharian fleet waited for orders. The humans remained in their protective circles, ready to die for their gardens. And for the first time in centuries of conquest, Commander Vexthar found himself uncertain about what strength really meant. The flower continued to bloom in the gathering darkness, its golden edges catching the last light of the day. Do-hyun arrived at the gardens just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the flowering paths. He was a philosopher farmer, someone who had spent equal time thinking about the meaning of life and growing the plants that sustained it. When he saw Commander Vexthar standing motionless beside Hyun-Soo's lily, he knew exactly what was happening. "Commander," Do-hyun said quietly, settling down on the ground beside the alien leader. "You're struggling with a new concept, aren't you?" Vexthar looked down at the small human who had dared to sit next to him. "Patience," he said, as if the word tasted strange in his mouth. "Your people speak of waiting decades for a single flower to bloom. This is difficult for me to understand." "It was difficult for us too," Do-hyun admitted. "We used to be much like you, always rushing, always taking, always wanting everything immediately." He gestured toward the memorial garden where names were spelled out in living plants. "Those people died because we couldn't wait. We wanted victory now, resources now, dominance now. We nearly destroyed ourselves because we didn't understand that the most important things take time." Commander Vexthar sat down heavily beside the human. For the first time in centuries, the great conqueror looked tired. "My worlds are dying," he said finally. "The first planets we took, they're empty now. Nothing grows there anymore." "How? Many worlds have you strip-mined?" Do-hyun asked gently. "Hundreds," Vexthar admitted. "We take the metals, the water, the organic compounds. When a world is used up, we move to the next one." "And your people? Where do they live?" "On ships, mostly. Mobile stations. We haven't had a true homeworld in a very long time." Do-hyun nodded sadly. "You've become parasites. No offense intended, but that's what happens when a species learns only how to take and never how to nurture." Mi Young, the terraforming specialist, approached them carrying a small cloth bag. She was a middle-aged woman with soil under her fingernails and hope in her eyes. "Commander Vexthar," she said, kneeling down to join their conversation. "I have something for you. But first I need to know, do you want your people to have a future?" "Of course," Vexthar said immediately. "Not conquest," Mi Young clarified. "Not more worlds to strip mine. An actual future. Children who will have children. Planets that will still be green in 1,000 years. Peace." The alien commander was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know how to think about such things." "Then let me show you," Mi Young said. She opened her cloth bag and poured a handful of seeds into her palm. They were small, brown, and utterly unremarkable. "These seeds can restore damaged ecosystems. Plant them in poisoned soil, and within 50 years, you'll have forests. Within 100 years, you'll have thriving biospheres." 50 years, Vexthar repeated. "At minimum," Mi Young confirmed. "But here's the important part. They only work if you stay in one place long enough to tend them. You can't plant these seeds and then fly away to conquer something else. You have to settle down, make a home, and nurture them." She held out the seeds toward him. "I'm offering you the knowledge to heal your dying worlds. But the price is patience." Warpack leader Morgan had been listening to the conversation while still holding the flowering plant Tae-young had given him. "What would we do during these 50 years of waiting?" he asked. "Learn," said a new voice. Jae-woo stepped out from behind a large tree, carrying a watering can. He was a man in his 50s who moved with the careful precision of someone who had found peace after great pain. "I lost my family in the food wars," Jae-woo said simply. "My wife, my children, my parents. All dead because we couldn't stop fighting long enough to solve our problems." He set down his watering can and looked directly at Morgan. "I could have spent my life seeking revenge. I could have dedicated myself to destroying the people who killed my family. Instead, I chose to plant gardens." "Why?" Morgan asked. "Because revenge would have made more orphans," Jae-woo said. "Gardens make more families." He led the aliens to a section where families were working together in the evening light. Parents taught children how to plant seeds. Grandparents shared stories while weeding flower beds. Young couples planned their lives around the seasons of growth and harvest. "This is what we learned," Jae-woo said. "Strength isn't about how much you can destroy. It's about what you can create that will outlast you." Commander Vexithar watched the families working in their gardens, and something shifted deep inside his predator mind. For the first time in his life, he saw a kind of power he had never imagined. The power to build something that would make the future better than the past. If my people were to try this," he said hesitantly, "how would we begin?" Tae-young appeared beside them, still carrying plant cuttings from her work in the memorial garden. "The same way everyone begins," she said with a smile, "with a single seed." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pot containing a tiny seedling. "This is from the same species that took Yun-Su 30 years to perfect. But we've learned faster ways to grow them now." She held the pot out to Commander Vexithar. "This will bloom in 7 years. Will you be there to see it?" The alien commander stared at the small plant. 7 years was longer than many of his military campaigns. It was longer than he had ever stayed in one place. But as he looked around at the gardens, at the humans who had chosen creation over destruction, at the evidence of what patience could accomplish, he found himself nodding. "Yes," he said quietly, "I will be there." High above them, the Veltharian fleet waited for orders, but those orders never came. Instead, Commander Vexthar activated his communicator and spoke in his own language for several minutes. The conversation was clearly heated, with angry voices responding from the ships. "Half my fleet refuses to follow new orders," he said finally. "They think I've gone mad." "Have you?" Do-hyun asked with a gentle smile. "Perhaps," Vexthar admitted. "I've spent 3 centuries believing that strength meant taking whatever I wanted. Now you tell me that true strength means waiting 7 years to see a flower bloom." Captain Daeho approached them as the last light faded from the sky. "Commander, what will you tell your people?" "The truth," Vexthar said. "That we have been dying slowly, world by world, because we never learned to plant anything. That these humans have shown us a different kind of strength." He looked down at the small plant in his hands. "Half my ships will leave. They'll find other worlds to conquer, other species to destroy, but half will stay. And maybe that's enough to begin." 3 months later, Captain Daeho stood on the observation deck of New Seoul Station, watching something unprecedented happening below. Former Veltharian warships had been converted into mobile gardens, their weapon bays transformed into growing chambers. Alien warriors worked alongside human farmers, learning to tend plants instead of hunting prey. On the surface, in the gardens that had once been a militarized zone, Commander Vexthar knelt beside Hyun-Soo, learning to care for the lily seedling that wouldn't bloom for 7 years. His massive clawed hands moved carefully around the delicate plant, guided by the patient wisdom of a 93-year-old human who had spent his life proving that creation was stronger than destruction. Warpack leader Morgan had established the first Veltharian agricultural colony on a dead world in their home sector. The healing would take decades, but for the first time in centuries, his people were building something meant to last. And in the memorial garden, where the names of war victims were spelled out in living plants, new flowers bloomed. They were hybrid species, created through the combined knowledge of human geneticists and Veltharian biotechnology. They were beautiful, resilient, and they would outlive both species. The day the aliens learned that humans don't chase had become the day. They learned to garden instead. And in gardens across the galaxy, former warriors discovered that the greatest victory was not conquering their enemies, but growing something beautiful that would feed their children's children. Old Hyun-Soo, now teaching alien warriors the patience required to nurture life, smiled as he worked in the soil. He had lived long enough to see weapons become plowshares, predators become gardeners, and the galaxy itself begin to bloom. The chase was over. The growing had begun.